Hi, Alicia. It's so wonderful to see you again, and it's been so long. How are you doing these days?
I'm fine. How are you doing? How are you holding up these days?
I am holding up. I'm holding up. There. These are interesting times
Yeah.
in the U.S. for sure, and internationally. Are you still part of the Melissa group?
Yeah, I'm there usually every Thursday more or less. Right now I think we have a lot of Ukrainians. Um I expect we will be getting, a bunch of Lebanese, I imagine, and maybe more Iranians. We have some Iranians now. So there's a kind of strange way in which the Melissa group is always pretty reflective of what's happening in the world. So that's interesting and depressing at the same time.
Can you just give a brief overview again of what Melissa group is?
So the Melissa Network of Migrant Women is an NGO in Athens, near Victoria Square, which is a place that's quite near to the National Archaeological Museum, but also an area with a lot of immigrants. And they have been providing, I think, since 2014 or 2015, all kinds of support to migrant women. The idea being that one group of arrivals can help support another group. So, the idea that somebody who's been in Athens for a while can also help others with, how to do your shopping or all the kinds of difficulties of navigating Athens as a foreign woman, or as a new arrival, maybe is one way to say it. But ever since the what you might say migration crisis or whatever of 2015, 2016, it's not just migrant women that's the emphasis, but often refugee women. And they support, they have like all kinds of support, psychological support, legal support, homework support for people navigating the Greek school system and so on. So
In your poetry group, how does it look like?
with warm-ups and some kind of prompt, a 20-minute free writing period. So it's not always that things come out as poetry. Sometimes they're more like diary entries or journal entries or so on. Although sometimes people do come out with quite good poems. Almost all of these cultures have a, you know, very rich poetic tradition, and I try for it not to be trauma porn. I'm not there to make people relive terrible experiences, although sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's weeping. Um, but sometimes it's joyful or funny or sexy or silly. All of these things can happen. It's a women's only space, so I think it feels like a safe space. There's always coffee and tea and cake and cheese pies and all of these things.
I was just rewatching your entire Triennial Gilbert Murray lecture back in
Oh gosh.
2022, I believe it was.
That sounds right.
And I was really moved by the found poem that you did, because that it's like flashes of diary, put together. It's a space where they can write about their memories, joy. Who they are is not just the trauma. Who they are is who they are,
Yeah.
and they're trying to rebuild that back together again.
I mean, I think that's one of the things. If you're an asylum seeker, there are really very specific boxes that you have to tick to be a successful asylum seeker, and so you're constantly re-narrating. It's sort of Homeric in a way, like you have these repetitions, and you're re-narrating certain terrible stories about yourself. And you have to be kind of part of an oppressed group in a way. So there's a choral element. So
But
it's very important, I think, to give people back the first person and their full identities, which is not entirely based on the worst thing that ever happened to them. So and I often also explain to people that, refugee is not a socioeconomic status. There
it's
are people who are very educated or had a very comfortable life who find themselves as refugees. It's not always, very oppressed, uneducated people, although that also happens. But one of the things that we do always try is to, yeah, give people some more control over their narrative. And another thing is like my classes are in English, and some of them are learning English or so forth, or we use people write in their native tongues often, but just a different kind of vocabulary, that is different kinds of description and so forth than you're used to when you're filling out all these forms. So we'll spend time talking about what different flowers are in different languages and so forth. Things like that, where it's these things that maybe people think of as luxuries, but are really quite essential to what it is to be human. And that's these things that aren't useful officially. And yet those are the things that are really missed, when even if you have some of your basic needs taken care of, maybe you miss having lipstick or your pet or music or a book. So that's, I think, one of the things that I've learned or been thinking about a lot. All of these enrichments that, are kind of capitalist society, when it comes to people that are being helped, declares as extra or not necessary, and in fact are really vital.
I think one of the prompts you talked about in the Gilbert Murray lecture was the what are the things that remind you of home, right? I think you brought up, or they brought up, bird seeds for birds, and that one stood out to me for some reason, probably in several different reasons. It's because you immediately the idea that you have the luxury of having a pet and caring for your pet, and once going through a trauma of being forced to immigrate, you're thinking of like just this food for yourself instead of food for a pet.
Yeah, we've actually done prompts too where we talked about pets. And those were some really interesting ones. We had women from Kabul who were distressed because one woman had to leave behind a bunch of cats, and it was a cold winter, and she wasn't sure they were going to survive or who was feeding them. In another case, um, some young women from Afghanistan were missing their white horse named Zahar, which is like sugar. Just like I too would miss my white horse if I had a white horse. So sometimes things were quite unexpected, where people missed having goldfish or goldfish in a pond in a beautiful garden. I mean, it was an interesting prompt, that one.
The poetry sessions are held in, is it in Greek or English, or are there translators?
We have, I mean, I teach it in English, although sometimes I will switch into Greek for some things if we're needing to communicate with some people. We usually have a few interpreters. So on an average lesson, I would say we have Ukrainian and Russian. We have Arabics. I think different Arabics are sometimes quite different. We usually have Persian and Dari or Farsi and Dari. Sometimes we have women from various African countries where I think mostly we're communicating in French, even though that might not be their first language. They might have a first tribal language. So generally, I teach the class in English. There is a flurry of translation. Some people have English. Some people have lived in Greece long enough that their Greek is quite good. So there's a flurry of translation and interpretation. People's phones can do quite amazing things, especially with texts. So people are also using their phones. And some of my favorite conversations are actually when people get into arguments about translation, and it's like a dialect difference, or, like the Persian speaker will say caterpillar is this thing, and the Dari speaker will say no, caterpillar is this thing. And then, there's this kind of interesting conversation about that. Again, we have a lot of Ukrainians, but some of the Ukrainians are Ukrainian speaking Ukrainians and some are Russian speaking Ukrainians. I unfortunately can't really tell the difference, and I've made some faux pas in that. But and that can be a somewhat political sort of issue about who's getting translated into what and how. I'm not sure I'm always aware of that. But then there'll be things that completely cross translation. And I think some people who've come to the sessions are surprised at how much time is taken where everything gets translated into every language. And so like we'll just pause and then, it'll go around the table and, then one group will laugh when they get the joke and then the other group will laugh, or one group will gasp and realize, that was horrific, or and sometimes people burst into song. We have a lot of singing in the class where someone is quoting a song and I'm like, oh, can you sing us that song that you've quoted from? And then they start singing. And so we have, quite a lot of multimedia kind of things going on. Sometimes people, want to show a video of something to explain something. Yeah, there's a lot. And again, it sometimes amazes me that we have so many cultural things going on and yet usually, can find things in common and things that we find are funny or devastating or anyway, that's kind of fun for me. I really enjoy, even though I haven't really picked up a lot of language, but I enjoy when we talk about words and what they mean and how they mean and all of that. That's fun.
But you've been not just in Athens these days. You've been in UK a lot. And
Yeah, I'm there at least 3 times a year, but probably more than that, because I'm delivering these lectures for the Oxford Professor of Poetry position, and there's one a term, and sometimes there are other things. So I'm back and forth quite a lot.
I was wondering if there were if you ever held poetry workshops like the ones in Athens in UK.
I do. I often have a generative workshop, when I'm visiting Oxford. It's usually a very different kind of group, Oxford undergraduates, although they might also be quite um, ethnically and culturally diverse. So I really enjoy doing generative workshops where people just have to write something on the fly because I think I'm not a super big fan of the workshop, the writing workshop kind of structure where you're meeting with the same group over and over again and everyone's bringing in things that they've already written and it's like, well, maybe you should move this comma or whatever. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I do like the idea of everyone starting on the same level playing field and starting from scratch and just seeing what they can come up with in 20 minutes, a half hour, and having them walk out the door with a draft of something they would just not otherwise have written at all, and that surprised them, and they can go and tinker with it and perfect it later.
To me, that sounds really fun as well, and a challenge and a way to synthesize at this very moment. Like it's
Yeah, I think it takes some pressure off because, again, nobody's expecting it to be perfect. And I think that's really an important aspect of writing is to take that editorial, judgmental pressure of your own self off of your creative self. So I think just having to, sit down and jot something off, having everyone know that you just jotted it off. So there's just I think, less pressure on that.
I do want to bring it back around to Briseis, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, that's I'm
Briseis
happy
and the
and
women
ready.
grieving. Um, I went, a full circle on this, and
I haven't listened to the new version. I need to do that. I mean, I had listened to and enjoyed your older version, but I'm sure you've made a lot of interesting changes. So I'm afraid I'm unprepared on that.
okay. So the main change, the changes that I did, is I started the whole thing with ancient lute replica.
Okay.
Um, and I layered it with voices so that
Okay.
it's actually many women grieving is what I wanted. But I only sang the speech of Briseis rather than the last two lines. In the YouTube channel, I had put in a thing about you. Uh, This
Oh gosh.
I said, notes. I was inspired by Oxford University professor of poetry A.E. Stallings, who had first requested me to put Briseis's words into music for her lecture given in Glasgow on 6 October 2022. The lecture was organized by the Gilbert Murray Trust with support from the A.G. Leventis Foundation as part of the 21 and 21 series of events marking the bicentenary of the outbreak of the Greek War of Independence. And then I put the YouTube link. I then wrote a subsequent lecture delivered to University of Nebraska in Omaha about what the entire passage, including the next few lines, mean. And I just put like the translation. I think I took from probably from Loeb, Iliad 19.301 to 302. So she spoke wailing, and the women added their laments. Patroclus indeed they mourned, but mostly each one her own sorrows. And I know, as in your lecture, that's been translated in so many different ways, but I wanted to put in that element without singing that part
Mm.
back into the song. I included lute this time and a frame drum. Having looked at the ancient lute these days and seeing where they traveled, would seem to have traveled,
Right.
coming from Mesopotamia, Levantine to Egypt, and sort of having dispersed quite a bit by in 1200 BC, um, I was thinking that it went west by then, and or even like through Egypt. I don't know, but I wanted to hear the lute rather than
Mm.
the lyre, because when I think of lyre, I associate that with Greek, although it started from again also Mesopotamia and then
Right.
Egypt and so on. But it's such a national Greek instrument of
Right.
ancient times, right? Classical Greek.
Right.
You think lyre, you don't think ancient lute, since there's only a few
Right.
depictions of that in Greece. Also, because the lute can be a small instrument, like the baglamas, like the
Right.
Greek baglamas, tiny. And
Right.
so women could travel with that, as opposed to a lyre, especially the big ones.
Right.
The
Right. Right.
big, when you think of campfires and things like that, you think of these days like I think ukulele because Hawaii, but
Right.
ukulele, guitar, something very portable that you strum. And so I was just thinking, of course, these women don't probably have an instrument on them, but if they were to come together around a campfire and sing their griefs, it would be with a lute, I'm thinking,
Mm.
and maybe even a tambour, a tambourine. I didn't put that in there. I just did a frame drum instead. But that was more the feeling that I wanted, and
Right.
um, so like weaving that in beyond just the words and the singing. I thought the musical elements that they take with them
Right.
as they're traveling. So all these components. Uh, I tried since I had a couple more years to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I look forward to listening to that. I mean, I'm quite interested in this idea of people traveling with their instruments. I think I've written about this in some other places, but where I talk about, what refugees carry, and one of the things they carry is you carry a tune.
Hmm.
But people, we even saw when people were arriving in Piraeus, people came with interesting and exotic instruments, and you just think like you're carrying only the very most precious things that you have, and you can't pack very much, and it's dangerous to take things over on a dinghy, but people brought instruments, and certainly in 1922 when you had the great exchange of populations, this is how Rebecca comes into Greece and so on. So the idea that people and instruments are also subject to migration. And we have that also with Achilles and the lyre. He's taken that lyre in the same set of raids that he's taken the women.
Yes.
And there's that idea of there being kind of part of this looting and part of the possessions that you take, things that have voices but don't necessarily get to use them, for their own purposes.
Speaking of Achilles and the lyre, and that, as you had said in the lecture, he took that uh, from Aetion's kingdom, Andromache's father, King Aetion, and and he's playing his songs, the deeds of men, on this lyre that he captured. There's like a strong
Yeah,
irony there, so much because uh, usually think a Greek lyre with a tortoiseshell because Hermes in the myth created the tortoiseshell lyre, and then gave it to Apollo. But the big bull lyre is Mesopotamian, and went west.
and this one is a silver bridge, which I think is sort of, people aren't quite sure what is happening with that, but it's
The
quite
Zigon.
specific.
I was looking because I've been, one of the things I'm looking at is how do we know something is a lyre and not a lute? According to the description of something. And the word is zigon, and that means yoke. And
Yeah,
in replicas of lyres these days, um, the yoke is the one that goes across. So
right,
a lute has a bridge. So and that's a different word entirely in
right.
Greek. So to me, that's, oh, okay. That's what makes it a lyre word, is the zigon. So the silver zigon. Um, I did look at that passage many times. Like, okay, let's look at all the words. How do we know?
Yeah, and that's a kind of, it's an interesting word too, because it's associated with yoking animals to work, but also yoking men and women in marriage. I mean, so
Yeah.
it is a kind of uh multivalent word that is interesting in the passage. I mean, I'm sort of fascinated with that whole passage, but
I'm fascinated by Homer's use of forminga, because he's the only one that uses that word. Everybody
mhm.
else uses different words for a liar.
Yeah, and when he said, I think I've written on this, and I've got an essay, the Lyre of Etion, which I think you've probably run into, but whenever he's talking about like having taken someone, and it's always like a female, and there's that teen, and the forminx is female, so there's a moment where it could be, a woman, and
Yes.
but it ends up being the form.
Oh wow. Okay. No, I haven't read.
Oh well, I'll send you
Yeah,
this essay
please. Okay. Oh my
because
gosh.
that was, yeah, it was because I was thinking a lot about because I was dealing with women at Melissa who had made that crossing, Bay of Edremit, and that crossing to Lesbos, and just looking at the geography of all of this much more closely, because this is exactly where Achilles is doing his raids, and the seven women from Lesbos, and so on, and his taking, the lyre, his taking these women, and so forth, and just starting to think of the geography and how some of the things were kind of still happening in this strange diachronic way, where there were, still women who were displaced, on Lesbos or from Lesbos, weeping, sometimes with the pretext of one thing, but everyone really weeping for their own sorrows and so on. But that it just really struck me very strongly that the instrument itself, is becomes one of these voices. And in fact, all of the things that he takes, particularly from Thebe, but also from Lyrnessos, all of those things, they tend to come back at really critical moments of the poem. And they're like three or four things. So there's we'll count Briseis, even though Lyrnessos is sort of a different there's the lyre from Thebe. There's Pedasus, the horse that has this really sad moment. He's linked to the immortal horses, but gets killed. So like in that kind of Sarpedon slaying, Pedasus gets hit, I think, by Sarpedon. And there's that bit of iron ore. There's a lump of iron ore that Achilles also takes. And, then when he gets to the funeral games of Patroclus, he gives all of these things away. I mean, it's almost like a suicide thing where he knows he's not going to survive very long. And there's a really interesting moment when he gives away the lump of iron ore, because you would think in the middle of a war, the lump of iron ore would be really, really useful for making weapons. But he doesn't describe it that way. He describes it for making plowshares and agricultural implements. And it seems to be like a kind of turning point in the poem where something has changed or broken, or there's this looking forward to a world that is a lump of iron ore could be used to be useful and not just to murder people. And like Briseis and Pedasus and the lump of iron ore and the lyre, to me, are all kind of they appear at these critical moments and they punch above their weight in the poem. She doesn't get much of a speaking part, but that speaking part is, again, just absolutely pivotal to everything. It changes things that go before it, and it changes things after it. I mean, she speaks of Patroclus as kind. He's the only person in the poem who gets that word. Nobody else is ever called kind. And we learn that she's a widow. She's not just like some virgin who's been dragged off. She's had a husband. She's seen 3 of her brothers killed. And when she brings those up, it's also interesting because who killed them? Achilles. And in a way, it almost suggests that Patroclus is also a victim of Achilles. All of the men she's mourning have kind of been killed by Achilles. I think Patroclus is implicated in that, his death. And it's also got I think it's got some of the most metrical problems in the poem, that passage. There are weird metrical things that happen. The syntax is weird. And it really, I mean, weird is not maybe the right word, but like when she's like, "Uthe men uthe," and then there's this, and it's a long time before we get to, you never would allow me to, after blah, 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 to cry. And to me, it sounds like sobs, that her interrupted syntax is almost like she's sobbing and she can't get the words out and she can't get to the critical infinitive. And I think a lot of Homer doesn't necessarily work that way, where you can't always apply that kind of pressure to individual lines and syntax. But this is one of those speeches where I think you really can. And it feels, again, very operatic or very performative or very, as you say, like something out of tragedy and not like something out of epic. And she's got her 7 backup singers, which is the chorus of women. But yes, it just is one of those extraordinary passages, and it's not very long, but I think everyone always remembers it. And I think something pivots or changes in the poem and she's likened to a goddess. She's clearly nobly born. I mean, again, showing that the Iliad is a poem of social mobility, but it's all downward mobility. The Odyssey has some cases of upward mobility, but basically, If you're a woman in the only the only direction is down, in the Iliad anyway. Although she had that suggestion that maybe she could have at least stayed a kind of respectable, noble woman. She could have been married off to Achilles. You get the feeling that, like, again, however Patroclus persuaded her of this or soothed her, Achilles maybe didn't have that in mind, but um, she's the very last shred of anything has been taken from her at that moment. There's nothing now between her and just whatever the worst thing that could happen. Anyway, it's just devastating, I think.
Oh yeah, I was just rereading the passage on my phone, so that I could really engage. And a couple of things that she does call Patroclus a leader of armies. So he's one of he's one of the men who raid, and of course he's a leader of armies for Achilles, but he didn't directly kill her family, but he's part of that group. He's not innocent of killing people, um, but out of the those men, he's kind because he soothed her and promised her some form of, as you said, upward mobility, some remnant of her dignity again, by saying you're not going to be passed around to men as a comfort woman. You will be married to Achilles someday. And that's, I mean, the fact that that is the most comforting thing he can say to her is, my gosh, you can't even begin to. But she clings onto that as something that she could have. And with Patroclus dead, that's no longer an option because there's nobody to champion her cause to be Achilles's wife. And that to me is the reason she's mourning him, because he promised her that one comforting thing. It's I found that whole passage astounding. Just wow. That is what Homer um, decided to write that she would say. My main sentiment about the Iliad in general is that it's an anti-war poem. It always felt that way to me, that it was not at all glorifying war. It was, look at all the terrible, terrible things that war does and how people survive through it, and how they deal with it, the many different types of men and women in it. And we get, the thoughts of an enslaved woman rather than a noble woman who's Trojan or who's Greek. I would have loved to hear what Chryseis had to say.
Yeah, she doesn't get any speaking parts. But I mean, I think it is one that, it's a sort of commonplace to say like that a novel or something is giving voice to the silent women of Homer. And I'm like, they're not silent. I really feel, as you say, it's actually quite a radical thing to have an enslaved woman give an aria. And at that time and at that moment, she's really raised up by the poet. The poet makes it clear that she's quite splendid, describing her as like Aphrodite and like a goddess. And this is and she gives her pedigree. She's not a nobody. She had respect, and she had a potnia meter, and she had you know a husband and a place. She names her, um, she gives her pedigree, and she's like, I'm not a nobody. And I think that, as you say, it's quite astounding. And I don't think it's sort of fair to say, oh, well, the women of Homer don't really have much to say when, they are there at these critical moments and they say these amazing speeches. Yes, they're not on the battlefield, so they're not talking there, but it's, they have these Um, and even when she talks about her brothers, being dear to her, it's that word in Greek, which is directly related to funerals, and it reminds you that a funeral is it's the caring for the dead, and it sort of telescopes that idea of mourning right there. It's still the modern Greek for a funeral, but it comes from this idea of the women care for the beloved. That's their care for the dead. Um, but yeah, I think if anything, it's quite amazing what Homer gives voice to. I mean, he gives voice to a horse. So
I love what you said about magical realism in your lecture. You said magical realism in the Iliad, of horses talking, and what else did you say? The horses that talk. Oh, of course, yes, yes. Hephaestus's little golden robots.
I know, golden fembots. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
Little
kind of I mean, it's very much a weirder poem than the Odyssey. I think it doesn't get credit for that. It's like just deeply weird.
aside from all the animal similes and nature similes and the gore that happens in war and stuff, in between those, the women are talking. And I always like pay a lot of attention to them because I just find it interesting. Like, oh, what were they thinking? Um, More is how men react to their talking in the Iliad.
Mm,
It's respectful. Like when Briseis is mourning, nobody tells her to shut up. It's there's her
yeah.
space. Uh, that is, of course,
And Priam can have a conversation with Helen. He doesn't
Helen. Yeah,
dismiss her as a
absolutely.
nobody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is some of that.
Priam's conversation with Helen was all about it's not you, it's men. It's it's not your fault. It's men and the gods. It's not you. It's not you at all. That was
Yeah,
interesting.
and I don't think Hector is not dismissive of Andromache. I mean,
Never. Yeah.
there is a lot of, to me, I think it's maybe surprising. I mean, they don't get a lot of they don't get the same number of lines. But I do think anytime they are on stage, as it were, it's um big things are afoot, big things are happening.
I love the conversation between Helen and Aphrodite when she says, I want to go back home. I want to go back home to Sparta
I
to
didn't
my
sign up for this.
yeah, to my husband and to my child. I mean, she mentions and my child. And Aphrodite says, "No, your task now is to be with Paris and do your duty." And she says, "Well, if you love him so much, why don't you marry him?" Is what Aphrodite says, right? Something like that. And I mean, it's incredible. This is a woman versus a goddess, and a little thing about what one's duty is. You know, like my
Yeah.
duty is to myself, my husband, my child, and that's where I belong. And Aphrodite's like, your duty is to this husband and to this war, like what you represent to these people or whatever. Being a prize, you're the prize. She's a prize of.
Yeah.
And that's really remarkable. I mean that little exchange is interesting, and what the three women say when they're grieving Hector, like they 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 grieve him for many different reasons. And what Helen says in the very end about you're the only one that what is her word? Did she not say kind?
I don't I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure about this, about Patroclus being the only one with the
Maybe the same
meclior.
that word. Yeah,
It
that
might
word.
it There might be another word. I don't have, unfortunately, an Iliad next to me, so I can't look at
Uh, oh, okay. So
it.
that's
Um,
yeah, but
yeah,
she
I mean,
says
and
that
there are a
with
lot of similarities there where with the Briseis Patroclus thing, there's this idea that Hector kind of stood up for her, and now he's gone, and what's to become of everyone.
Well, now
with
she's
that.
going to go back home. It's almost like she's like,
She's okay.
well, now the last nice person in Troy is gone, so I'm just going to go back home now. But in the Odyssey, she sings about Odysseus, and that's interesting because it's like lamenting Hector, and then oh, now she's back home and she's recalling a story about Odysseus. She's such a major part of both those epics, and she's different only in her role, but to me she's fundamentally not different because she was saying that she wanted to go back home, and here she is home, and we see her
Mhm.
home in the Odyssey. So it's something like what does she look like when she's back home and happy and comfortable? What does a happy, comfortable woman look like in the Odyssey? Because
Yeah.
we only see that happen once. Where I mean, Nausicaa is a young woman and she wants to get married, but here is Helen. She is exactly where she wants to be, and she's
Yeah, they're clearly problems with the marriage though. That's what that scene also is. Everyone has to be drugged to even have this conversation.
oh
And
yeah, yeah. The
and then, it's to me that that whole scene is sort of like, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, like, where everyone's like, what is really happening here?
Oh, you didn't see the
Um,
drug thing as her. I saw that as actually a sign of Egyptian culture, because
well, I think it is that, but it's also all the stories come out kind of under this in this altered state, and they're kind of
okay,
performed
right.
for Telemachus and Pisistratus in this way, where I think um there's I mean, the only kind of, besides Penelope and Odysseus, the only sort of happy married couple where they've like a love match is Hector and Andromache, and they're the only ones. I mean, everybody
Yes,
else, there's been some kind of violence or pressure or political reason, and they seem to have had a normal wedding, with normal dowry, and it seems to be it's not marrying two kingdoms together or what have you, and he doesn't have 30 concubines. It's just the only kind of weirdly what we would consider kind of normal male female relationship in the whole poem, and I guess that's what makes it so tragic as well.
that's so true. Oh my gosh, now that you pointed that out, it is the most romantic one, as in he goes to her. They seem to be really partners. He goes to her and talks to her, and she says her concerns, and of course he. I always think, Hector, don't go.
Yeah.
Like, I did want to say that Chryseis was we feel the love of a father for a daughter
Yeah.
with Chryseis. So we see women not just as prizes of war, but who there's a father who wants his daughter back, and that starts the plague. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, what did you say in the lecture? Going back to your, like, I mean,
Oh,
this is like
see,
getting like,
I have no memory of what I said in lectures,
well,
so
it
I
was
can't.
brilliant. Let me tell you, it was brilliant. And
Okay.
I keep going back to it over time. It's the second time I've watched and listened to the whole thing again.
Oh gosh.
But I've watched, little parts of it before. Um, but yeah, the part that you said, that during that for the ancient Greeks, a plague signaled uh, a ruler who's not doing his job. And we saw that in Oedipus, and where else was it? I mean, besides the Iliad, where do we see that happening?
Well, I think there's a suggestion of that even with Athens and the real plague. There's,
Oh, sure. Well, I
something.
mean, yeah, actual history. Yes, yes.
But I think it's often just it's interpreted that a plague kind of um punishment or indication that something is not right in the leadership.
Hmm. And the whole the Iliad starts with the sing wrath, but sing wrath of Achilles, but also sing wrath of Apollo, like it's within the first 15 lines. And Apollo is interesting because he's Trojan the entire time. He's a Trojan god the entire time of the Iliad, never Greek. And the two things that you tend to see in iconography as Greek, a lyre and Apollo playing the lyre, neither one
Right.
happens in the Iliad. So, that's something, to think about.
Well, he was a major god in the Troad, so I mean, it may have some basis in something. It was sort of interesting to be reading that during like COVID and so forth. But it was one of the things that did intrigue me is Homer seems to understand that the plague is zoonotic, and the first deaths are actually the mules and the dogs, and it then comes to the people.
Mm,
Uh,
mm-hmm.
I'm sort of fascinated with all of these things. I've got a separate hobby horse fascination with like there's the various horsey things in the Odyssey. And it sort of strikes me that like the very first deaths are mules and the very last word is tamer of horses. And there's a lot of the horses, but it's very similar to the women. The horses and the women have a lot in common because they're beautiful, they're prizes, they have long hair. They're captured as booty. They are high status things to own, and they have a lot in common. So I think you can look at them together with some it can be kind of useful.
I like to point out that once horse taming Hector is gone, then the Trojan horse comes, which he cannot tame because he's not
Yeah.
there.
That's-
And the Greeks come.
Yeah, and just I mean I'm sort of also intrigued just that the so many of the Trojans um are it's indicated how indigenous they are because they are the sons of rivers and springs. They
Oh,
belong to the land.
oh,
And the Greeks, in that sense, are sort of like colonizers, invaders, and they don't have that land connection. But so many, when you're looking at the deaths of the Trojans, it'll say so and so was the son of this river or the son of this fountain, and it really connects them to the land. And the poet seems to be aware of this indigenous element of the Trojans.
oh, I love that. I love that. Speaking of magical realism, the river
Mm.
god is a person and a river,
Yes.
and and acts as such. I love that element of it. Having been in Lesbos finally, a few years ago, it was really interesting to realize the hotel owner was telling us that um, most nights when the wind is strong, you can hear people singing from Turkey
Wow.
because it's that close.
It is that close.
It is that close, and the um the restaurants had Turkish as well as Greek menus. Like
Yeah.
things were written in Turkish and Greek, and I think that's usually it. Thank goodness my Greek reading is fine, especially food. Like I know my Greek food, Um, though I might mispronounce the accents here and there. I have to remind myself. If it weren't for accent science, I would be kind of really lost. That it's really that close, that whole area. Um,
Yeah, I mean, if you start looking at the geography, I mean, I have
yeah.
like very elaborate theories about these things, but yeah, I mean, I think actually the Iliad is really more concerned about that geography of Lesbos and the Bay of Edgermont. There's just those raids come up again and again and again and again and again, and it's almost as if the Trojan War is like an afterthought compared to just all of the repercussions of these sort of piracy raids that Achilles did right before the action of the poem. Um,
And what was going on at the time. It wasn't necessarily a big organized a country attacks as we think, but like a bunch of raids of different people. Well, thank you so much. I mean,
Thank
I've
you.
asked you all the questions that
I
been
hope that was
burning in my
useful.
head to
You know, I
ask
mean,
you.
I'm not an expert really on any of these things. I just sort of am obsessed with them, but I hope it's helpful. And I look forward to hearing the new version.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you know, my whole conversation with you is all about what does Alicia think about these things. Uh, it's you know, I think sometimes there's this kind of a weird framework maybe placed upon academics and even creatives who deal with academics, who are academic as well, that like the words that fall off your lips, that's what you think is forever and you're gonna die on that hill. And it's just it's not that way. It's like this is what you think at the moment based on what you know and based on what you've processed and based on what you've experienced, and you know, all that. Right now you could change your mind in a few years and have many more things to say, and you don't even remember your lecture from
I
you know,
do
4 years ago that I keep going back to, and I'm like, oh, but it's fabulous. But that's why I'm bringing it up. It's like, oh, do you still think that, and how do you feel about it today, and what are you all about now, and what are you up to? And I think that's always the beautiful thing, is the growth of such a brilliant mind and a brilliant person as yourself. And
Oh, that's very kind and
where
coming
you
from
go.
you, who are yourself quite brilliant.
Oh, thank
Well,
you.
I look forward to listening, and maybe we will meet up on the other side of the world at some
I would love to meet up with you here. Welcome you
point.
to California, and hopefully it's sunny, so I could say welcome to sunny Southern California.
That would be great. Um, well,
Thank
thanks very
you.
much, and I guess this is it's very early your time, so have a good day.
Thank you.